Shame has such a major impact on how you view sex and what you want and what you don't want in a healthy relationship when you're struggling with the fearful avoidant attachment style. I am Pauline and I am so happy you are here because as a fearful avoidant, you are struggling with shame and it impacts your sex life and how you experience sex and how you look at sex. And a shame-free sex life will always be the best. And so we're going to dive into 6 ways how shame impacts sex as a fearful avoidance so that you're aware of it. Because I think for me, for so long, I just wasn't aware that this was impacting me. Sometimes feelings can be so familiar that you're almost blind to them, that you don't even really view them, you don't even really acknowledge them or really feel them anymore. It's just a background noise that is always on. And then when you've healed, you will see that, oh wow, I've felt that for so long, so often, almost continuously. And you can't even imagine that you felt it that much and that long and that continuous. So sometimes just being aware of it opens the door to healing it, obviously. So 6 ways that shame impacts sex. The first is that fearful avoidance, when you're a fearful avoidant, you probably have been shamed for being too much, too sensitive, too needy, too dramatic, too whatever. And this goes for girls and boys. So this is when you were brought up and you were younger. And everything that we kind of pick up and the beliefs that we get installed, you take with you to adulthood, and it has an influence on all areas of life, also in sex. You just take those patterns with you and it applies to pretty much all of the patterns. It's not just your relationships either. It's work, it's friendships, it's all areas of life. So maybe it feels weird that this kind of starts in childhood and you take it into your sex life, but I think just sex is such a beautiful, vulnerable thing, and it makes so much sense that the patterns that we learn and the beliefs that we have and the feelings that we have as a kid, that we take that into adulthood. It's not that all of a sudden that is completely gone, or it doesn't pertain to sex because that was not a sexual thing when you were younger. That's not the way the brain works. That's not the way the fear brain works. That's not the way your nervous system works. So you definitely take all the ways that you have experienced shame or that you have been shamed as a kid, you take that into adulthood. And also that also plays out in your sex life as well as other areas. And so being shamed for being too much can definitely also play out in your sex life. You kind of, you contract, you try to stay small in a way, and you're not really showing yourself in sex, and that causes sex to be boring after a while. I've made several videos about sex feeling boring and being boring, and one of them is that when you just keep holding back, when you keep trying to tone it down, to not be so much, to not be so sensitive, to not be so needy, you're not really feeling any of your needs and your wants. You won't even allow yourself to go there because you don't want to be shamed for them. And I think with sex, it's almost like there's a magnifying glass on the vulnerable part of it. And vulnerability in and of itself is a trigger when you're a fearful avoidant. You've probably experienced that when you feel vulnerable, either in the moment you're triggered or afterwards you're triggered. And you just have this vulnerability hangover, almost whiplash. I mean, the vulnerability hangover is something Brene Brown brilliantly coined. But for when you're a fearful avoidant, it almost feels more like a whiplash, right? It's not just a hangover. Feels like you can do something about it, and you can kind of coach yourself through it or love yourself through it. But what it feels like, what it can feel like, and what it felt like for me was just a complete whiplash. Sometimes I was just the trigger came so fast and so hard that I was completely overwhelmed by shame and by guilt. But probably even more shame for being so vulnerable. And I think sex is just the area in life where vulnerability is magnified so much, um, especially especially when you're in a healthy relationship, especially when you really want to connect and really, want to be seen in a way and build a sex life that lasts for decades, that just grows and becomes more and more deep and passionate. So being shamed for being too much will always cause you to tone it down, to kind of see whether you're um whether you're okay or not, um whether your partner thinks that you're being too much or too sensitive or too needy, instead of tuning in with your own wants and your own desires and what you feel like in this moment, where you feel like this sexual connection that you're feeling right now can lead to. So that is the first one. The second one is, and this I have to definitely shout out, um, a comment that was under my last video by Sever Metal that said, I do want to say that it is often easy to overlook men and how hard it can be for us to say no because we are expected to always be ready. Saying no often results in partner shaming as well. So I just explained that we take the patterns from our childhood and that can play out in adult life in all areas. But obviously there are also a lot of cultural things that play into shaming in sex and that have a major impact. And this is such a good point that I just wanted to point it out in a separate video, that we have been conditioned to think that men always have to be ready. They are always ready, and when they're not, there's just something wrong, either with us because we're not attractive enough, because aren't men always supposed to be ready, or with them. And I've heard a lot of stories from men being shamed for not being ready, um, not being ready, like physically, but also mentally, emotionally. When you're vulnerable, when you're really wanting to be vulnerable, that can trigger so much, which makes it really logical that you're not physically ready. It's so much easier in a way to have sex that is not connected, because then you don't have to be vulnerable, you don't have to show yourself, you don't have to, there's just a lot that comes with sex that is connected. And even more so when you're a fearful avoidant, because at the core of the fearful avoidant attachment style is a fear of connection. And sex and intimacy is one of the most connected things you can do in a relationship. So when you as a man have experienced that you saying no, or you not being ready in whatever way, on whatever level, um, that you were shamed for that by ex-partners, then that has an impact, obviously, on the experiences you have afterwards. It can feel like pressure. It can feel like I have to perform. I have to always be ready, which almost feels like something looming just kind of constantly, and starting, this is what I literally have heard back from men, starting to almost be afraid of your partner wanting sex, and because then you have to be ready instantly. I try to kind of like see what that would feel like, and I can almost imagine it feels like you just being summoned to run a race every single second, and that can feel like a lot of pressure, especially when you know that being shamed is never okay, obviously, but I mean, it never feels good for anyone. Shame is just one of the hardest um feelings or emotions to feel as a human being. Shame and guilt are. And so when you expect shame, and you've been brought up with a fearful avoidant parent that used shame as a way to change you, to punish you, to make sure that you adhere to whatever they wanted, shame becomes even more um, overwhelming and feels even more heavy because it feels justified that you feel shame. And then when you get shamed in the area of sex, it instantly becomes a performance issue, because the way to overcome that shame, it feels like you have to perform, you have to do well, you can't fail because then you'll be shamed. So that is a very good point, and something that is very real, I think, for a lot of men. I've heard it a lot, and I don't think it gets talked about often enough. But when you want a healthy relationship, a beautiful relationship, there is emotional maturity that is absolutely necessary, and that is part knowing um, that men, especially in connected relationships, aren't always going to be ready instantly and can be triggered and have their own vulnerabilities and their own fears and their own pressures. And um, it is so important when you are together with a man that you know that, and that you can just uh, see that from a place of emotional maturity, not saying anything necessarily about you or your relationship or the attraction, but just him being a person. I remember when I was struggling with a fearful avoidant attachment style, I was so overwhelmed by how much I felt helpless and hopeless and powerless, that I didn't have a lot of space for my partner's needs, my boyfriend's needs. He's now my husband. And because I just could not handle any more, I could not even handle myself. I couldn't handle my own feelings and my own thoughts because they were relentless, and it was so overwhelming to just be in my body and have my brain, have thoughts 24/7, that I kind of saw him as not needing anything. And he played that part. I mean, that was part of our dynamic. Looking back on it, I can say that was emotionally immature. It was not right. It wasn't healthy. But it also wasn't meant to be mean. It wasn't from a mean place. I it was very, it almost felt like surviving to see him that way. Not really needing anything, not, yeah, in a way, not really being a just a messy, normal human being. I needed him to be Superman because I felt so utterly helpless and powerless. And so I think that there's a lot of partners that look at their man that way. Um, and I'm not saying it's right. It's just a something that we need to learn, that what we may have been conditioned by or brought up with, that men are strong and always, always ready, always can handle anything. Men are people just like women are, obviously. And I think we are starting to really see that, but that dynamic can sometimes still play out a little bit. So that is a way that, or something that is very, that pertains really to men. There's also the equivalent for women, which is that women usually are shamed for wanting too much or wanting sex. And what I've heard again and again and experienced is that when men feel like they can't handle the powerful sexuality of a woman, then they can also shame that woman because of their own feelings of failure or fear of failure. And so instead of just realizing like, whoa, okay, this is triggering, or this is something that I'm not sure I'm up to, so maybe there's, work to be done in me. When you haven't healed at all, when you haven't done any work at all, it's so much easier to then shame the wanting, the person wanting it, the person wanting sex, um, to kind of tone it down. And I think that is something that is very culturally still for women, relevant, that we always need to tone it down. We always need to hold back. We can't really be powerful. We can't really say we want things, because we have to be humble and we have to be, nice. And I mean, this is just this could be a completely different video, right? Just a complete discussion about how culturally men and women, how that impacts. But for a when you're a fearful avoidant and you're a woman, shame also is even more overwhelming, um, because it feels justified. So when you've experienced that you were shamed for wanting sex, for wanting more sex, then that also feels very scary. It can feel like just something you never want to experience again. It can feel like death in a way, because shame was used when you were younger, to change your behavior or to punish you. So there are specific ways when it comes to sex that shame has an influence on sex for men and for women, and there are so many more. Obviously, this is just almost the tip of the iceberg. Then the fourth way shame impacts sex as a fearful avoidant is, you have probably been shamed for just wanting things, just wanting things, just needing things when you were younger. I know that whenever I wanted something, whenever I expressed wanting something, for my dad, that was an immediate trigger for, oh, she's not allowed to get spoiled. She has to be humble. She can't be demanding. She can't be entitled. That's not what he said, obviously, but looking back, it's such a clear pattern that anytime I would just simply express that I wanted something, that would cause him to almost become defensive immediately and see how he could correct me so that I wouldn't become spoiled or entitled. And this is something that a lot of fearful avoidant parents operate from that belief that I have to do whatever it takes to make sure that my kid is not entitled or spoiled. And so there becomes this very heavy negative charge around wanting things, just wanting things. And so what you do is you close off wanting things. You just don't want things anymore because that's more safe. And that also plays out in sex. You're scared to speak up for what you want, what you like, what feels good, what you would like next. And that can just cause you to kind of dissociate and not really be there anymore, because it doesn't matter what you want anyway. And I think that is a belief that a lot of fearful avoidants have. It doesn't matter what I want anyway. And so you get to a certain level of wanting things that, or wanting sex that feels comfortable and that feels safe, but anything beyond that feels very scary and would cause you to shut down or dissociate. And so the shame around wanting things causes you to tone down and to not really be in tune with what you want. And then there's also the wanting things that are different. You've probably been also shamed for wanting different things than what your parents wanted, or what they thought was correct or right or good or noble. And that didn't have to be sexual at all, but that also plays out in your sex life when you want things that are different from what you think you should want, or what is culturally accepted, or what is the norm, whatever that may be. And I'm not even talking extreme things. It could be very small, subtle things. If you expect shame, you're not going to have the safe space to experiment. And that is something that just makes sex so much better, right? When you can experiment with what you want and what feels good and what doesn't, and you feel just safety to do that. Shame impacts that, and so you won't allow yourself to experiment. Then the fifth one, I'm going to go through them a little bit faster because this is becoming a long video again. The fifth one is being shamed for saying no and having boundaries. I don't think I've ever met a fearful avoidant, after having helped thousands by now, um, that had absolutely no problem saying no or having boundaries. Some actually said no a lot and had boundaries a lot, but it wasn't from a place of just calm power and complete, autonomy and feeling safe with saying no or boundaries. So it was either not saying no or boundaries, or saying no and having really harsh boundaries. Which none of that is bad. It's just um, there is emotional charge around saying no and having boundaries for when you're a fearful avoidant. Pretty much all fearful avoidants have that. So you may recognize that saying no and having boundaries is just, it can almost feel like impossible. You don't do that. And especially when you love somebody, you cannot say no because that's selfish or that feels cold. That is all conditioning, obviously, that you've been brought up with. That also plays out in sex and in your sex life. And for sex to actually be good, it is so important to be able to say no without any feelings of shame or guilt. It's not bad when you feel shame and guilt when you say no. I just want you to know that you can get to a place when you've healed, you will be able to say no without guilt. And that's what I mean with the emotional charge around it. When no, say, just the idea of saying no and putting up boundaries just fills you with fear and shame and guilt and all these emotions. That's emotional charge. And the more emotional charge you have around something, the harder and more overwhelming it feels to actually do that thing. So when you've healed that, when you've released that, and you can absolutely do that, saying no and having boundaries just feels neutral. It feels like ordering bread from a bakery. It's obvious. Okay, I want that. Oh no, it's not charged anymore. You don't have any overwhelming emotions or feelings with it. It's just a very, how do you say that? It just, obviously you can say no, and obviously you can have boundaries. And when you feel like you can't say no and can't have boundaries when it comes to sex, you're gonna go past your own boundaries. You're not gonna listen to your body, or you're gonna resist sex altogether. I made a different video on that where I go into depth about that. But when you feel like you can't say no and you can't have boundaries, you're not even going to take the first step towards sex, because you feel like if you take the first step, you have to go all the way, and you might not be ready for that, or you might not want that 3 steps down the line. So being able to say no and having boundaries is so important, to be able to really stay present in your body, where you can also feel all the good things, all the pleasurable feelings that come with sex. So um saying no and having boundaries is a much more important part of an amazing sex life, and a healthy and safe and secure sex life, than often gets talked about. Then the sixth one, the last one, is being shamed for vulnerability and for power. Oh gosh, this is a big topic again, but this video is so long already. If you're still here, you're awesome. um, so being shamed for vulnerability and power, vulnerability is a trigger for the fearful avoidant, and being powerful is a trigger for the fearful avoidant. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep it really short. Vulnerability and power are both so important to have amazing, mind-blowing, connected sex. Both of them. And sometimes it feels like you can only be vulnerable without power, or you can be powerful but then you can't be vulnerable, and that is just not true. Shall I just make a whole new video on that? If you want that, let me know in the comments below and I will make that. So for now, these were 6 ways to that shame impacts sex as a fearful avoidant. I really am curious whether you recognize any of these, and whether this impacts you also. So let me know in the comments below. I always read the comments. So I'm so happy you are here, and I will see you in the next one.
Healed and Happy is a tailor-made online program where me and my team personally guide you through healing the roots of a fearful avoidant attachment style.